Hello. It's so good to be here. I am on LinkedIn Live with Dr. Julie Pham and Jen Martin, and we're going to be talking about the practice of connection. And this conversation was spurred by my recent podcast conversation with Jen. So I want to do introductions and then open the floor up for Jen and Julie to share. Jen is a coach and consultant working with leaders and teams to navigate change creatively. And she's been doing that for more than a decade. She has coached and trained thousands of people across industries and sectors. And her new book, The Creative Way Forward, will be out in a week, or actually, some of us already have a copy. So we're excited to share that ideas with that book with you, or at least one core practice with you. Julie is also from Seattle. We're all three here in Seattle, and is the founder of 7 Forms of Respect, which is also a best-selling book, and also CEO of Curiosity Based. And I ran across one of Julie's posts about connection, and so we wanted to have her here too, because that post got a lot of traction, because it's such an important topic right now. I'm very interested in this, both for the well-being of my immediate family, but also because as a coach, I do know that leadership can be very isolating. In fact, the Surgeon General called it an epidemic of loneliness and isolation just last year. And so for people who've experienced isolation or just are wanting to be more connected, and it's also just a great practice for leadership. And so that's why I thought it would be a wonderful conversation for us to have, and the practice to highlight from Jen's book. But what I want to do now is bring in Julie and Jen and let them say a couple words. And Jen, for you to share a little bit more about your book.
Yeah, well, glad to be here. Excited to join the conversation. And I'll jump in here and then I'll let Julie share some thoughts, because she did have a great article that she had put out. So in the book, The Creative Way Forward, there are 7 practices around how do you stay creative instead of reactive in uncertain and changing times. And one of the practices is to connect with others. And so that's what we wanted to talk about today. And it is something that you have to be intentional about. Sometimes I think we forget that, relationships are important, but you have to foster them and you have to seek them out. And it's important in the regard to being creative, because when you feel disconnected, you actually will have a more pessimistic view in the world. And when you have more connection, when you feel that level of connection with other people, and it doesn't mean a lot of connections, but that you have these relationships, which we'll talk about in a second, is you're going to feel more creative and you're going to feel more capable of tackling challenges. And we were talking earlier in prep for this about the study that's highlighted in the book at University of Virginia, where people were being brought in front of this hill. They were just walking by. Some were individual, some were with a friend. And the study included the researchers saying, hey, put on this backpack, heavy backpack, and look up at the hill and tell us how steep you think it is. And for those who had a friend with them, their observation and perception of how steep the hill was less than people who were by themselves. And then they did this study later, and it was like, just think about a supportive person in your life, and it was still less steep, which is a takeaway for, anytime that we're facing challenges or tough times or uncertainty. When you're thinking about and connecting with people who are supportive or that you're supporting, there is a level of regulation that happens in your nervous system that helps you access more of those creative ideas or creative approaches. And so I'm going to talk briefly about the 3 relationships, and then we're going to get into a conversation around them. So the first one are core supporters. So these are the folks who are going to be there for you no matter what. And there is, I think, a misperception out there that we have to have a lot of people in our lives to support us. Well, it's like 2 to 4 is the core supporters. And this is providing almost like a platform for you to go out and stretch and take risks. And Brene Brown has a great tip around this, where she would write down her 3 or 4 folks on a sheet of paper before she goes out into a big event or doing something that's scary for her, and put it in her pocket, and just remembering them, which goes back to that research around the steep hill. So the core supporters, we need that in our life in order to stretch and do new things. We can keep coming back to them. And then the second one are travel companions. Those are the people who are going through things with us. So
Mhm.
someone who, and it can be in groups, or it can be just someone, maybe it's your sibling who's going through a situation with you, or a coworker who's going through similar things, or you're going through a training program and you're doing it with other people. I consider you both travel companions with me. And then the third one are guides. So these are people who may have been either through what you are going through right now, and they're a little bit further ahead in the experience. Not that the experience would be the same, but that they can give you some thoughts and feedback and tips to go forward. Coaches are also good examples of guides, people who can really help you through the process. So those are the three relationships that are highlighted in the book.
Jen, what I really appreciate about your book is how specific it is, how it's not this have friends, have social connections. It's actually like, no, these are the different groupings. Because when I read that, it's just, oh, well, then who are the core supporters in my life, and who are my travel companions, and who are my guides? Because it's true, when we are navigating change, it can feel really lonely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember when I first became working with my family in a business, and none of my friends were entrepreneurs, and that felt super, super, super lonely until I found other entrepreneurs. I think it'd actually be fun if we could each go around and share, well, who would be, to just name some examples of those three categories, and I can start since I suggested this. So
Thank you, Julie.
so 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 yes, I think for those core supporters, I definitely think about my partner, who we talk almost every day about, hey, this is how I'm processing the day. These are the tough things that are in the day. And he does something so different from what I do. And so it's nice just to get his perspective. And there are times where he's just listening. Sometimes he's giving me advice. It's just that core support.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the travel companions, I actually think it's my coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I started my company, I was an employer from the get-go. I took the risk of actually having employees, and I often talk about, we're on this journey together. And the analogy I like to use is, we're on this airplane and we don't know how fast we're going, because we're actually traveling together.
Oh, I love that.
And then in terms of my guides, I have so many guides, and I'll just name one. I think of this couple, Yoshi and Naomi Minagishi, who I call my Japanese parents, and just how they have given me so much advice over the years of how to navigate my career, and also sponsorship as well. So, what about you? What are three, if you were to name some people?
Yeah,
in
well,
each of
I
those
love the
categories?
clarity of those examples. They're so feels so makes it so much more real. And I definitely think I have a friend in Wisconsin. Her name is Sam. Shout out to Sam Crownover, who's in my core supporter group, and she's really good at coalescing her core supporters. So we all know each other. She, in addition, of course, her husband probably being one of hers, and my partner is one of mine. And as I think about it, I think I'm still a core supporter for my daughter in her 20s, but I can see that role shifting a little bit, and us being, and her definitely nurturing me more, which is really lovely, and feeling like she's in my corner, and that I can tell her more now that she's a young adult about what's going on for me. So that's definitely a core supporter. And then the traveling companions, that's such an interesting category. What I really appreciate about the fact that you've laid that out, Jen, is that I think sometimes we can be hard on ourselves or hard on other people when they are in our life and then not in our lives. Like somehow we did something wrong, or we're flaky or whatever. And so just knowing that at different stages, you need different things. And I know when I had young children, it was really important that I had moms who also were working as not course supporters, but as companions, travel companions, because it's such a unique situation. Just as I'm sure if you're an at-home mom, that you want to have that context with others sometimes as well. So that's one example in the past. And now it's probably more varied. My travel companions could include the coaches that I have in my collective. I think that would be a great example of me recruiting people to be my travel companions. And then guides. Well, my friend Jeff has always been a mentor and a guide for me. So I would definitely put him in that category. And many others. My mother-in-law is a wonderfully generous and wise human. So I would put her in that category also.
That's great. Well, I
Yeah.
already mentioned having you two as travel companions. And then to your point, Julie, like there's different groups that I'll be part of where, especially like entrepreneurial groups where you're in the same experience. And that's really powerful because if you feel like you're alone, that can feel very debilitating in terms of stretching into new things. And so it's that normalizing of, oh, actually, it's hard for other people too. They didn't feel like it was easy.
Right.
Core supporters, my husband, my sister are part of that. And then guides, I've had a number of coaches. And one of the things that, Nina, you were touching on too, is that someone can play multiple roles or different roles over time. And
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I was wanting to get across in this practice is that being both intentional about fostering these. And so by breaking it into some different types of groups, it helps you orient yourself around, oh, who do I need to really get connected with or nurture these relationships, but also to let go a little bit, because there's some fluidity in relationships. And if we hang on too tight, again, that moves us away from that creative place. So there are natural starts and ends to relationships. And I think that when you have three buckets, so to speak, it almost sort of balances you because the buckets may change in terms of who is part of those. But did you know that there's somebody at any given point playing different roles?
Beautiful. Well, I would love for us to talk a little bit about how do we make sure, I think we all have different conditioned tendencies. In fact, there's, a lot of research now in leadership development about, some of us moved more towards complying or pleasing. Some of us withdraw when we're under stress. Some of us want to engage directly when we're under stress. And so I find relationship building really easy because it feels very purposeful to me. But I am a withdrawal type when it comes to stress. If I'm really feeling a lot of tumult and a lot of change, my first instinct is to kind of go and take care of myself and to spend time alone and do self-care. And then eventually I'm like, wow, I really kind of need something besides what I can give myself. And so then I remember actually having coffee with someone, with a good friend, or getting on the phone with someone to strategize about a business dilemma is actually what I really also need. And so I'm wondering, like, how either one of you, because Julie, you're also very experienced with this connection piece. Like, what do you see for helping people remember to initiate or to make time for that if they are more of the kind of person who needs that space and time to be alone?
When you said that, I was just, I think when I'm under stress, my first instinct is, who do I talk to? How do I talk through this? So it's actually not for me to be alone. And I am actually, I think of myself as a amnivert. So there are definitely times where I need my alone time, but it usually comes after talking through with people and getting all of these ideas and then trying to make sense of it in my own world. So in terms of how do you do it? Because I think that a lot of people say, oh, well, people they're not staying in contact, or I don't have friends, or I feel lonely. And it's just like, well, what are you going to do about it? How do you reach out? And when was the last time you connected with someone? So I think even just trying to remember that we're all busy, and yet I can't remember the exact stat, but it's just, if you reach out to someone who you haven't reached out to in a long time, the chances of them feeling good about that and then responding are actually really, really high. So when that and I know, like, and Jen has lots of strategies too about how do you bring your friends along when you're navigating those hard times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, to that point of, I also consider myself fairly extrovert, but I have a very strong need for downtime, and I can get in my head and I can kind of close off. And then it's like, you pick your head up and you're like, wait, I haven't talked to people in a really long time. And then you reconnect with them and you think, God, that was great. Why didn't I do it before? So I do think that there's some practices to put, or some tools to put in mind, like getting connected with someone once a week at least, and Julie, there was great research that you saw that Seattle, unfortunately, is pretty limited in how we outreach, and super connectors are reaching out to 3 people a week, which may not seem that large of a number, but so I think what's super important is being intentional, again, kind of building it in. And there is that argument of, well, we're busy and we don't have time to do this. And yet that connection is both supportive for you, and the research, and this is in the book too, about when you support other people, obviously that's important. We need more of that in the world today, but it also comes back and benefits you. And so in this one study, they were giving people extra time to go off and do whatever they wanted. And then this other group was going to support an underserved school by helping with some paperwork. And then they asked both groups who had more time, who had more free time. And it was the group that supported other people, because again, there's that biological need for connection. And when you support other people, you get that renewed energy. So I would say, being really intentional and building it in, even if you don't feel like you may want to, because the benefit is truly there.
Yeah. It's kind of like eating a big salad. Sometimes you kind of want the burger, but once you eat the salad, you feel so good.
Well, so, and Jen, that study that you mentioned, the idea was the question was, how many social interactions do you have a week?
Yes.
And so in Seattle was actually ranked second in the nation for having one or less. So we were at 42%. This is greater metro, right? This is not just Seattle, the city. Only after San Bernardino. And the lowest on that list was actually San Francisco, which is interesting because people often compare Seattle to San Francisco. And then what they call these super connectors, having 3 or more interactions a week, was Seattle was at the lowest. So Seattle had 14%, and compared to San Francisco at 22%. Now, I think with the study, I think they're actually talking about in-person connections, and they say it's for your friends or your friends or family. And I actually don't think we need to meet in person. So that can be one major way to ease the how do I make time for this? Because I actually do a lot of my social interactions is just as phone calls, just as co-walking phone calls. And so I think, and then I'll even tie it into, and let's talk in the evening when I need to walk anyway, so I can digest my meal. So it's how do we build these into our lives so that we can have that social connection, and we're also doing something good for ourselves too.
Yeah.
I really love that, especially because I think my theory, and I don't have research for this, is that video doesn't satisfy that limbic connection that we really need to feel as being part of the mammalian family. I don't know if that much brain science is useful in this conversation, but that part of our brain that developed before the neocortex was the part of the social brain. And so I imagine on the phone, Julie, when you're walking, you probably feel that limbic connection in a way like the person is right there beside you. Whereas on video, I think we get kind of distracted by all the visual and we forget there's another human across that flat screen over there.
Yeah. And I think we're also beginning to associate video with work.
Yes.
Right? If I need to be on a video call, it's because I need to screen share. And so whenever possible, if it's a one-on-one, even if it's actually a work call, I'll try to see if we can just make it into a phone call. And then we don't have to worry about, not only is this the social interact, I have to look nicer on camera. Was my room clean? Right. And so I think that we can eliminate or at least reduce some of the stressors by having it be a phone call. And I also just think connect more, commute less.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's I love that. I need it as a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you mentioned, Julie, around, this idea of video at work can feel, or video gets associated with work. I love the comment you said that you see your coworkers as travel companions. And I love that framing because sometimes people will say, oh, we're family. And I think that can be a challenging thing in a work scenario because you don't fire your family or, lay them off if there's hard times. So, but this idea of we're in this together, I think is really crucial to foster in organizations. So even for an individual going through change and transition, really being conscious and intentional about the relationships you're fostering. But if you're a leader in an organization, really thinking about how do you foster that level of connection that is about we're in this together, we have agency individually and collectively, how do we support one another? So I thought that was such a good example, Julie, of you talking about the travel companions and how that can be parlayed over into an organizational frame.
Well, yeah, and with your 3 groupings, it doesn't have to be, I would hang out with this person socially.
Yeah.
Actually, I think about my colleagues is we have deep, close relationships, but we're definitely not family. I don't even know if we'd say we're friends. yet the conversations that we have and that we share about our own lives could be much we know a lot about one another,
Mhm.
and that the thing is, work can be personal.
Yeah.
You don't have to talk about your all your inner trauma for it to be personal. Work is actually pretty personal too.
Great point. Great point. So Kim Hagenbach is saying being purposeful and intentional with relationships is very challenging for me in the chat. Thank you for sharing that, Kim. I think that's true for a lot of us and wants to find a way to do it more. And one idea that I have for all of us is more of a systems lens on this whole topic. Like we can put a lot of initiative on ourselves to make the change happen, but we can also be systems thinkers. And I think about this podcast I was listening to this morning with Dan Buettner, the guy who popularized this idea of blue zones, where you live longer in areas where certain things are also happening. And one of those things is a high level of connectivity. Like there's a lot of sense of communities, extended families live near one another. And I think that we can also be advocates for living in the kind of world where it's easy to connect. And so, the Seattle, San Francisco difference, right? Like whatever that is, I still feel a great sense of connection in Seattle. And partly it's because I can walk to my coffee shop and I may not have a deep conversation with anyone, but the baristas are friendly. They know us. They talk to the people in the line. And so I feel like I'm part of a community when I'm there, even though I may not know anyone else by name, except for the barista who's giving me my coffee, right? So I'm curious for Jen, when you were writing the book, how did the idea of what's going on in the background influence this idea of practicing connection? What do you think? Anything to add there?
Well, I think it's crucial. And I'm also looking at, there was another comment here by Lynn about how this is key to healing our world today. Like we absolutely need a level of connection, and it doesn't have to be huge. Like you said, that connection with your barista, just knowing their name. Like my husband goes and works out at a gym and they don't hang out, but they're travel companions in the sense of working out. And they're like, hey, good stretch on that. And that feels then so centering and so renewing in a world that is really challenging, and there's so much going on. So I think that this is one of the practices that is so crucial and yet can be underestimated in so many ways, and considered, especially if you're talking about in the organizational world, undervalued. So when I do a lot of workshops around communication or team building, or how do you navigate change, those, times when it's tougher with organizations where they're pulling back on their budgets, it's seen as more of a nice to have, when it's actually super crucial. Like you have to build those level of connections and ability to work well together and support one another, because it's hard. The world is complex. There's no easy answers. It is really so relationship dependent in order to find out, okay, how can we move forward together? How can we be creative? And again, regulating your own personal system. And there's something called emotional contagion. So it's also being very careful of who you spend your time with intentionally. Like obviously you have to work with people, and you don't always have a choice in that, but you will get that feedback off that other person, and you may take on their affect without even realizing it. And so if you're around people who are in more of a negative state or not as supportive, you're going to take that on. So even if you have that in your environment, make sure you have your core supporters thought out, that you have it in mind.
Yeah, really. That's so important, right? There's nothing more contagious, like you said, than mood and mindset. And I'm thinking about Lynn Abate Johnson, who's here in the audience, and she's been a travel companion for me with social media for a long time. And she is my biggest supporter, always commenting, always present. And I'm not as, I feel like I don't get to as many of her events as I would like to, but it's such a great thing to have this common ground, this one thing that you do with someone that you always know they're going to be there for you. Well, we need to start to think about closing this conversation out. So just as we kind of think about relationship and connection as a practice, not just a nice to have, or not just something that's random, like what do we want people to walk away with? And we can all just take a minute to think about that. We don't have to rush, but I'm just reflecting on all of the cool things we've covered so far, but also wanting to honor people's time. And so I'm just going to be silent for just a second to think about this myself. And whenever someone's ready to pop with something, please do. And in the chat, if you want to put something about what you're taking away, that's great, because they'll have that for the group that listens to this later.
Julie, why don't you go next?
Yeah,
What's
I'm
up
just
for you?
thinking of it. To be intentional doesn't mean it has to be this huge effort. It just means we have to start. So I'll just leave with this: is think about someone who you haven't connected with in a long time, and just send them a text message or an email and say, how are you doing? It'd be great for us to have a phone call. And yeah, so I would say that's just one thing, one small action to do, and you'd be surprised by the response.
Very cool. Very cool.
Um,
Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was just, yeah, and you can close it out. But
Yeah.
I you know, particularly because I'm not a huge social media fan, as people know, and now I'm having to do more of it, so I'm getting out there. But I do think that there is this false impression, kind of to your point, Julie, that it doesn't have to be a big effort. You also don't need to have lots and lots and lots of connections in terms of, you know, these three groups. Like, it can be a small number, and that can fuel you for meeting lots of different people. But then it gives you some of that flexibility of, oh, I didn't hit it off with that person, or they didn't like my work, or that, you know, you've got, again, you come back to that central group of folks who can provide you with that support, and who you're also supporting, that I think is so crucial, again, for staying creative and being able to navigate all the different challenges that we're navigating. And don't think it has to be a huge group.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really great insight. And make it fun. I was thinking about, like, I like to write personal notes, but I tend not to sit down and do it. But when I do, if I'm in the morning and I'm fresh, it's an amazing thing. But I think what I want to commit to is more video messages. I love this thing now. We kind of gotten away from voicemail, but I love leaving little video love notes to people I care about that they can listen to, because there is something about hearing someone's voice that feels, again, more connected than, especially with my core supporters and the people I support. That could be a short and easy way to connect when I maybe don't feel like I have time or energy for like a 15 or 30-minute conversation. So that's one thing I'm going to try coming out of this. And I just wanted to, as we close, I just want everyone to know about Jen's book. If you weren't here at the very beginning, The Creative Way Forward, which is about lots of 7 different practices for navigating change in a creative rather than a reactive way. And we also have a conversation coming out on September 23rd on my podcast, Let's Get Real. And you can find that on any of the apps that you like to listen to. Just look for Nina Simon's Let's Get Real. And I just want to say thank you both to Dr. Julie Pham, but also to Jen Martin for being here and having this conversation, to all of our audiences for making time in a busy day over the lunch hour to sit and to listen and contribute. You all are amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Nina. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.